My name is Amber Garrison-Duncan. I work at Lumina Foundation as a strategy officer, and I'm so pleased. I can't tell you how the expertise that is in front of you today are some of the key people that we hold up and time again to talk about the work that is happening in community colleges. And so I want to kick off our panel this morning of kind of telling you a little bit about, from a philanthropy perspective, why Lumina is interested in this, and then I'm going to turn it over to our amazing colleagues here to talk to you about the actual work. And so I just want to highlight some of the things that Sugar definitely shared. And Lumina Foundation is a goal foundation. We have one goal, is that by 2025, 60% of Americans will have a post-secondary credential. And we didn't invent that out of the air. We actually used some evidence to help us understand why 60%. And early research is that that 60% of jobs by 2025 will require some type of post-secondary education. So where are we at today? We monitor that at Lumina Foundation. We have a report called Stronger Nation that we issue every year that tells the country, are we on track to reach that goal? Right now we're at 40.4%. We have a lot of work to do in 10 years. And what we also try to do is you can disaggregate that data. You can go down to a state level. You can go down to a county level within a state. So you can really, we want to provide guideposts for you to understand where progress is being made, where some work could be done. So feel free to rely on that data and evidence because we hope that that's what it can be used for. And certainly as we look at that, the 40.4% that have credentials, again, we know we have a lot of individuals that do not have credentials. Our problem is that we have a lot of students now entering, but a lot of them leave. We have 36 million adults in this country that have some college, sometimes 60 credits, sometimes 90 credits, but do not have a credential. They haven't been awarded something. So that's some of the workforce that Sugar's definitely talked about, is there's a lot of adults out there who have some college, no degree. We want to target those individuals. But we also know that what is happening in the institutions is not working. And so at Lumina, we've actually, one of the things that when Joe and I started talking is that we have found our place in us talking to individuals and foundations and other organizations that we never would have encountered before. When we were a strictly higher education foundation, we were in the higher ed world. Now we find ourselves in the workforce world. We find ourselves in human services. We find ourselves collaborating across. And I think that that's just really important for what everyone's going to share with you today, is that we can't remain in our silos. Our current system is not working. And I think that highlights why scholarships are considered low impact for us now. We are a $1 billion foundation. We could fund a lot of people to go to college. But when so many of them don't make it through, that's not a strategy. The strategy is the system has to change. And so that's where we focus all of our efforts, is how do we help the system change. And from a philanthropy perspective, again, we do this through certainly, again, investing in projects that at a state level or in various ways. And I just want to say verbally, we are constantly looking for funding partners in this work. We can't pay for it all. You can't pay for it all individually, but collectively, what can we do to move these systems? We also do this through thought leadership. You will constantly hear our CEO out talking about what America needs, and his new book is America Needs Talent. And certainly he's on the road drawing attention to this issue. And so as philanthropy, we can say things that sometimes others can't say, and I think it's important for us to step into that role and challenge society and challenge people to think about these in new ways. We also, as Sugar mentioned, a convener. We are constantly trying to pull people together, because when Lumina calls, people show up. And so we have to be conscious about philanthropy. How do we do this in a way that allows the work to happen? So just again, a quick overview of Lumina, why we're so interested in this, why we are committed to this, and why we work with these amazing people day to day. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Davis to talk about community college. Why community colleges, and why is this so important? And I'm just realizing I didn't allow you guys to introduce yourself, and that was just rude. So I apologize. You want to do introductions real quick?
Hi, good morning. I'm Marcia Ballinger. I'm the president of Lorain County Community College. We're about 20 miles west of Cleveland, Ohio, and have been deeply immersed in the pathway movement and working very, very closely with the Community College Research Center, and Lumina is one of the partners in that.
May get a little feedback here because I have multiple mics,
you don't
right?
need this.
Don't need this one. Very good. You know to look to the folks in the back who know what those mics do, right? I'm Monty Sullivan. I'm president of Louisiana's Community and Technical Colleges. We're 13 community and technical colleges across Louisiana. We serve about 150,000 students in a state of 4.6 million people. Sandy said it very well a few minutes ago. It is an outward-focused effort to serve a group of folks who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to earn an education, participate in the economy, and find that better life for themselves.
I'm Davis Jenkins. I'm at the Community College Research Center, which is a teacher's college, Columbia University in New York City. And we have the good fortune to study one of, I think, our great democratic institutions. I didn't know anything about community colleges, and I worked with this firm that did consulting for higher ed in the 80s, and we worked with Governor Hunt in North Carolina doing a study. He saw that community colleges, along with universities, could help take North Carolina from a tobacco and textile economy to a high tech. And so I fell in love with the work of these institutions, and we've been sort of a critical observer looking at the data. These are very significant institutions. 45% of students who are undergraduate are enrolled at community colleges. The majority of Latinos who are undergraduates in college are at community colleges. There are more African American males and Latino males in Bronx Community College than there are in the entire Ivy League. At Valencia, there are many, many more. The Bronx Community College is in CUNY, so we're in New York, so it's even smaller than Valencia. These institutions, even with their current performance, have a very high return on investment. Our research looks a lot at the economic impact of community colleges, and the most conservative estimates suggest that certainly for the student, you see this essentially, as Sandy was saying, progressive entry into the middle class. In Washington State, you'll hear from John, we talk about the tipping point, where if you get that certificate, you can move, and we can see it in the labor market data, from poverty to a middle class, and then the ladder that follows from that. But for the taxpayer, the conservative estimates are for every dollar that the state puts into community colleges, they get $2.50 in return in wages alone, and the increased tax revenues that accrue to that. That doesn't include increased health care, decreased recidivism, and there's good research, our colleagues at CUNY have shown that especially through women, there's strong intergenerational effects of community colleges. So this is a good investment. Despite that, and I won't dwell on this, there's been a lot of talk about affordability of colleges. That's the affordability to the student, which is a critical issue. Tuition and fees in community colleges is generally affordable. Books and living expenses are a big issue, this opportunity cost. But the real issue, the real economic issue with community colleges that hasn't been addressed is that what is the cost of providing a quality education? And tuition only covers now, although it's increased, about 40% of the cost. The rest comes, most of it through public subsidy, especially state and local funding. That has declined dramatically since the Great Recession, or even before. Since the Great Recession, 17% states' funding of higher education has been cut 17%. It varies by state. Louisiana, their governor cut $700 million from state higher ed funding. Despite this, since for the last, two decades, community colleges, I don't quite know why. I guess it's because they're crazy. It's a movement. Have been working on this issue despite the decline in state support, and I think actually because of it, how to improve access by students to education and careers. And higher education in this country is set up as a sorting system. And we sort people out. We waste so much human talent. This cold storage and low-wage work motivated people by imposing a traditional thing that really sorts students out invidiously for the wrong reasons, by making them take algebra and tests that really are not relevant to what employers want and even what you need to succeed in college. So we're sorting students out. So over the past 20 years, Valencia has been a leader. These people that you're going to hear from today have been leaders in this, despite the economics of it, and I think in part because they've taken a different approach, which is start with the end in mind, where the end is careers and not just one ultimate career. Suddenly you pass law school and you're now a junior partner. It's the ladders in the labor market, and especially the ladder from low-wage work to that initial semi-skilled work where you can start to not only make a decent wage, but you're learning, and as you move up, as the woman at the hospital did, increasingly your employer is more likely to pay for your work. It's backward designing that ladder and the rungs on it, and accelerating the rate at which students get in and through, and using your resources, incredibly efficiently to get students through. That's been the nature of the change and the movement, and I would say it's now a national movement. And I'm going to turn it over to colleagues here who are doing the hard. It's easy to study, and it's inspiring to study this work, but these people are true heroes in terms of the value that they're adding for our society and our economy.
So I'll pick up on Davis's segue to share with you what it's like on the ground within an institution. And I couldn't agree more with the comments from Sandy with regard to Valencia. And one of the unique aspects of community colleges is that we're uniquely designed to respond to the needs in our local communities, in our regions. And so we have been at the work for the past half dozen years in earnest with regard to Davis's concept of designing with the end in mind. And to give you some further context around Lorain County, we are a very industrial-based community, and we're also very agricultural. So we've got this bifurcation that occurs within our region. And we are located next to Cleveland, Ohio, which has a lot of unique circumstances, very, very similar to what we've heard with regard to Valencia, and we have more improvements that are occurring, but manufacturing, which has been the stronghold of our region, has gone from 30%, we had one of the highest in terms of the national average, down to about 11%. And so with that, over time has come the challenges of individuals, most of whom in our community are first-generation college students. We have steel mills, we have automotive plants, and so, the days were that students moved from high school, if they even graduated from high school, into the jobs that were held by their fathers and grandfathers, and so that was part of the generational aspect of it. And so what we have done is we have focused very intently on two sides of an equation. We look at growing jobs and growing talent, because we know that the jobs that are there and that have been there aren't the jobs that are moving us forward in the economy. We know that the large manufacturers are gone, and so we have focused heavily on the entire ecosystem around creating our own jobs, entrepreneurship, focusing on industries that our region hadn't even thought about. And so,
why don't you talk about the sensors?
oh, I can talk, sure,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. He's been there many times. So to give you an example of that, we work with universities and found a niche in that universities are developing a tremendous amount of research and sensors that are complementing, whether it's the automotive industry, biomedical industry, in construction, you name it. And so we have developed a commercialization center for those sensors that take it to market in areas that need to have packaging, reliability testing, so that we are putting those sensors into the pieces of equipment that might be going into your iPhone or the biomedical device that is in your knee. And so we've developed then academic programming that fits with that, in this particular case, mechatronics, and it's all being driven by industry. And that has led to, I think, a very innovative culture that has changed, in many cases, the perception of what community colleges are doing and why we're playing in this space. But it truly is that intersection between the growing the talent and the growing the jobs. And so as we look at then how do we design with the end in mind, it is looking at what are the jobs, whether they require the 2-year degree, whether they're the rungs on the ladder for the certificates along the way, or it's that bachelor's degree or a master's degree. So what we've done, we're a very vision-driven organization. We do our strategic planning, and I think that's an important part of this conversation, because it has to fit, again, what your goals are, what your aspirations, what your community is invested in. And so I just have a couple of slides here that I'm not going to go through each of those, but just to give you the context that the #1 priority that we have that has come out of our strategic planning process is driving student completion and academic success. And so all of the guiding principles that Davis talks about in terms of guided pathways, it's not a one-off program. This is not about creating one special program that's going to help one population of students or the community. This is about a holistic approach to rethinking how community colleges operate, what our guiding principles are, what our design principles are. I think the comment about faculty, at the end of the day, if you don't have the right faculty in the classroom, you're never going to make any of this work. And so that's a foundation upon which this is built. But what I wanted to share with you is one of the major movements that has occurred within community colleges is how do we think about preparing the colleges, as Jo Kwong said in her introductory comments, to one of historically we look at it in terms of is the student college ready? I mean, you hear that time and time again. That's the whole developmental education conversation. But truly, we have to think of the colleges in terms of, are we student ready? Do we have our policy systems, processes set up and designed so that students are able to accelerate through it to get to those jobs? And so we've redesigned it based upon pathways, and behind me are examples of the 9 we call them meta majors. We don't use any of that language with students. We have to translate it into what does it actually mean to them. But this gives you a sense of these are the types of programs all aligned with business and industry needs. The employers have to be driving this. If they're not, we're not designing to what the needs of the region are. And then you can see once these are the career, the rungs on the ladder, so to speak, and that acceleration of how you develop it in a way that students aren't losing credits as they're going through it. One of the biggest complaints that we hear, and it's so upsetting when you think about students taking 90 credit hours to get a 2-year degree, when a 2-year degree should be 60 credit hours, it's because we haven't designed it with the student in mind. And there's a lot of self-interest that occurs as part of that. And the excess credit hours just accumulate and don't add value for that student. And so those have been, I think, important capacity building issues that occur on college campuses. And as the philanthropic community looks at the type of support, a lot of this is redeveloping our capacity, rethinking how faculty teach. What are those support services and the technical expertise? I do have to say we at Lorain County Community College, Ohio, is one of the states that was part of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Completion by Design initiative, along with Florida as well as North Carolina. That really did provide us with the acceleration to learn from some of the technical assistance partners and to really bring together and convene those who could help push that agenda forward, because we understand we're not in it alone. And so many best practices do exist and are evidence-based. And the research is demonstrating how effective they are and how the graduation rates are improving, the credentials are improving. And so there is a tremendous opportunity, I think, to look at how do we scale some of this up. And so that was a lot of the progress that we've been able to make as a result of completion by design. But one of the pieces, and this is probably the most groundbreaking for us, and this goes to the heart of your question, I think, about high school students, because we have focused a great deal on high school students and the pathway for them to go from high school to a bachelor's degree as part of the pathway. While we do a lot on the workforce side as well, we also know that if we're not addressing this side of the equation, we're not going to build the workforce that we need for the future. So we have looked at creating pathways that actually begin with a student in 9th and 10th grade. And part of that is through state legislation. We have a dual enrollment program statewide, which is called College Credit Plus. But what we did is, instead of just thinking about it as a standalone program around dual enrollment, we approached it from the end in mind, and we looked at developing. We now are up to 22 pathways, and we are in over 30 high schools delivering the programs, and the return on this in just one community. The city of Lorain is our highest poverty area. Students typically, 50% of them don't even get to the 12th grade year. We have taken that community, we created Titan College, so that's the name of their mascot. We have branded colleges within all of these high schools. And so those students, just this past year, the parents saved $900,000 by earning college credits, and they're just not picking and choosing, I'll take a class in A, B, or C. We are delivering those courses in all of those high schools as well, and they can take some on our campus. But we have created the pathway so that they can, in these 22 high-demand areas, by the age of 20, they can earn their bachelor's degree at 80% less cost than if they were doing it going to that. And I've got this is the chart for that. And this just gives you a snapshot of some of the programs. It has been phenomenal. And part of what's been occurring as a result of this is it's changing the mindset. And students are beginning, and their families are understanding that they can achieve these milestones in going through the program. And if they have their goal set on that bachelor's degree, and we hope that they do, and all those bachelor's degrees, they can complete then on our campus. So we've partnered with 13 universities that offer all of the bachelor's degrees in their entirety on our campus. And what's more, the way in which we've been able to create the model for this 80% savings, we've created what we call 3+1 degrees. So a bachelor's degree is 4 years typically. The associate's degree is 2. But when you get faculty looking at the curriculum between the 2-year degree and the 4-year degree, we are able to match the outcomes so that we've created MOUs with all of those universities that third year comes out of our curriculum at our price, so that, and our faculty deliver it. And the faculty in the high schools, we credential to teach the courses that are our courses in those 30+ high schools, and they meet our credentials, they deliver our curriculum, because guess what? We found that in many cases, these were the same faculty who were teaching in the evenings on our campuses. So we had to break through a lot of the political barriers and the policy barriers. The state has done a lot to support that. But we now have the best value proposition in the entire state of Ohio, probably one of the best in the country,
And
with regard to it.
What they don't, so, community colleges have a stigma, but a middle-class family who in the past would have sent their kids directly to state university, this is saying you can get these same degrees, and these are all nationally known, recognized, industry or career relevant to the Northeast Ohio bachelor's degrees. What they don't tell you is along the way they have certificates and certifications and associate degrees that the public and the students know nothing about, but they're built into the curriculum, and there are jobs in there. So you're luring them with these bachelor's degrees, which are real and what the public and students want in the fields, work with industry, but along the way you're building the ladder for the future workforce that Sandy was talking about doing for the current workforce.
We actually went to, we're a tax-supported institution, and so about 35% of our funding comes from our local taxpayers that we have to go back out to every 10 years to ask them to reaffirm their support through taxes. We actually created a brand new tax levy that we took to the community for this, and they passed it by 54%. And we did that 20 years ago. The part that we've blown out now has been starting in high school and creating that entire continuum so that we're aligning the high school curriculum with the college curriculum. And some of that was also based off of our early learning that we had with an early college high school, which is on our campus. And we really dissected the curriculum between K-12 and the college curriculum to redesign it in a way that takes out of it some of the replication and creates that greater alignment, particularly in terms of what is deemed college ready. Right. So a new piece that we're moving to this next fall is looking at that 12th grade year throughout our community and taking our developmental courses in math and in English, which are now we're delivering in a co-requisite model. And what that means is, testing, assessment testing is very challenging. It's not reliable. And we placed way too many students into developmental courses who never get out of those developmental courses. And so we're now placing students directly into college level courses, and the results are showing they're performing every bit as good as the students who placed into the college ready courses, but we wrap around other services and additional time with that particular instructor. So we're pushing that down to high schools as well, because we think we have an opportunity to close that gap even further as a result of it. So I'll stop there and wait for questions
what you see is
later.
enormous return on investment. The research on dual enrollment suggests that it's very effective in getting students who wouldn't otherwise go to college and complete. It's more effective when there's a strong connection to the college, and although we don't have the research, it's pretty clear that it's going to be even more effective when it's tied to programs in the college that are in turn linked to the local labor market, and that's what they're talking about doing here. And the last thing I'll say is the research also suggests that I think we set I understand why, the cutoff points, the grade levels for students in dual enrollment too high. Our research suggests that even students, say, who are at the B and C levels who are going to be lower income, could do just as well, especially in this programmatic, career-focused kind of path. So I know a lot of you guys work in K-12 education.
Davis, to follow on that point, I think some research that the center has done over the years shows very clearly that minority males in particular enrolled in career and technical education dual enrollment programs see tremendous gains as a result. So we're constantly looking for that silver bullet to solve one of the greatest challenges of our society is attainment and economic participation, if you will, for those populations. A great example of ways for us to really improve the life standard for many folks who fit that profile. I am envious of hearing my colleague talk about the process of being able to build career pathways in an environment where you do it in a very purposeful kind of way. The subtitle of Louisiana's story goes something like this: from necessity is the mother of invention. And unfortunately, as Davis pointed out a few minutes ago, our governor over the last 8 years cut over $700 million from higher education. That resulted in a reduction of our state general fund of about half. But I'm not here to complain. Instead, it has become one of the great stories, I think, of community colleges, not because I was a part of it, but because we used it as an opportunity to transform ourselves. As you heard a few minutes ago, as Amber talked about the Lumina report that was just released back in April, Louisiana made gains from 50th in the nation in post-secondary attainment to 26th. Pause and think about that for a second. From 50th to 26th. Huge gains. Now, to the credit of Lumina, an organization that initially was hesitant to include credentials below the associate degree, when they realized that the data was very clear that the economic impact for those people who earn credentials below the associate degree was obvious from a wage perspective, from an earnings perspective, from a future college success perspective. And so they go back and they add those credentials. Louisiana's economy is one that requires people with skills below the associate degree. And so we have been one of the nation's leaders in producing certificates for many years. And so you begin to see how that impacts the economy and the offerings at our institutions. So I want to give you just a little bit of background as to where we have been. You know, when you lose $100 million in a $250 million organization, I want you to think of that in your own operations, okay? You probably had better think about changing. And the reality is, you'd better think about changing not in terms of how you look down and into the organization, but you'd better look up and out. And what Sandy pointed out a few minutes ago, he didn't give examples of all of the curriculum changes or department structure changes or all of these things down and in at his institution. He talked about the up and out. He talked about the population that we're serving. He talked about the needs of business and industry. He talked about the dynamics of the labor market, because that's what these institutions are about. And so community and technical colleges in Louisiana, realizing in this period of time where we cut $100 million, we narrowed the program offerings by 700 programs in 5 years. Now, if you've been through a program elimination in the higher education environment, you know it's painful. It's ugly. 700 of those in a period of 5 years, it will change your life, I can tell you. But it also changed our institutions, because what it did was it caused us to think much like the restaurant industry. We have in our hometown of Baton Rouge, we have a chain, a restaurant chain.
I'm hungry already. I'm hungry already.
It's not the up end that most of you have visited if you've been to Louisiana, but Cane's, it's fried chicken and French fries. That's it. That's all they do.
The sauce, don't forget the sauce.
And the sauce. Don't forget sauce, right? But I want you to think of this for a second. Who would have thought that you could have made a success out of chicken strips and French fries? But they've done it. And the reason that they've done it is they do it very well. And so what we have typically done in higher education is we've tried to be all things to all people. We can't be that. We don't have the resources to be that. We can't be the institution where students show up to find themselves. That's not us. Our students' population is not a population that's interested in climbing walls and lazy rivers. We're a very different kind of organization. So as you think about the impact of our institutions over this journey, we have eliminated a large number of programs. Our programs are much more adept now and aligned with the industry demands. Our average student population, 27 and a half years of age, very much oriented toward the workforce economy. Those program offerings, though, are limited today, and most of the resources that we spend are aimed at 7 occupations. Now, some people, when they hear that notion of 7 occupations, they're kind of concerned that we may be missing some things. Well, let me tell you, we don't have resources to focus on many more than 7 occupations. Healthcare is not one of those. In the community college world, when you tell people that healthcare is not one of your bread and butter programs, that blows them away. Well, wait a minute. What are the programs? Well, the programs happen to be economic driver programs. They're programs that bring new resources into our communities. They're programs that help to grow the economic whole of a community. Healthcare is a trailing indicator of the economy. It is a function of population and the health of the population. And so while healthcare is very important and we want to be a provider, want to ensure that there's a workforce. If we're going to grow our communities, again, up and out, we have to do so in a way that is going to be oriented toward those kinds of occupations that help the economy to grow. So the who, the what, and the how. Very simple framework that I'm sure you could use in your own organization. The who for us became very clear when we did an analysis of our demographics. 4.6 million people in the state of Louisiana. Of that 4.6 million, 2.3 million are working age adults. Of the 2.3 million, we did a very simple analysis that you could do in your own state of the educational attainment of the population. What we found was 670,000 adults with a college credential of some level. We found 550,000 adults with some college and no credential. You heard that referenced a few minutes ago. 525,000 adults with a high school diploma only, and 600,000 adults with no high school diploma. Just think about those demographics for a second, okay? As Sandy pointed out, those are not factors that you change overnight. Those are generational changes over time. And so it requires, if we're going to feed this economy in Louisiana, that, by the way, is growing. Louisiana's economy is growing while the nation's is a bit stagnant. We have over $180 billion worth of industrial construction going on from Lake Charles to New Orleans along the I-10 corridor. Think of that for a second. So where do we find those construction workers that we talked about a few minutes ago? Where do we find the industrial maintenance technicians who are going to serve those plants once they're built? Where do we find the process operators who will operate those facilities? They're turning to us. They're looking to your institutions to provide those. So the who is very clear. It's the 600,000 adults. In a later discussion, we'll talk about how we take those adults and bring them into our institution. How we had to rethink, as an example, the high school diploma as a requirement to get into college. I just have a fundamental question for you. Who said the high school diploma was required for college? It's the most ridiculous concept if you think of it. Education is not linear. It is an iterative process. The reality is most of those 27-year-old adults who show up at our institutions, they didn't quit school because of decimals or fractions. They quit school because of life circumstance. And they come back to us more motivated than they've ever been before. And there's a reason. They have no cushion. You see, you and I kind of have a cushion in life. They have none. They have kids depending upon them. They have lots of folks depending upon them paying their bills. And so that 5 to 6 week course that we talked about a few minutes ago may be the only option. It may be the only hope for them. And so the what becomes really important, because let me tell you something that we've learned about those adults. They have, excuse the phrase, they have a bullshit sensor like no one's business. You try to convince them that there's a job at the other end, they want to meet someone who's been through it. They want to know for sure that they're going to put their life on the line, that in 6 weeks, there better be a job there waiting for them, because they don't have another option. You are their only option. And when you realize that, you realize the gravity of what it is you've been given. You have an opportunity to fundamentally change not only one life, but a society. Democracy's college. The who, the what. You'd better be aligned with industry demands. It's an analytical discussion, but it's more importantly a discussion of partnerships with industry. And one of the recommendations I'll make to you in a second as the philanthropist community is don't be afraid to tie your investment to an industry investment. Many a times I've had a conversation with someone from the philanthropy community who was concerned about tying an investment from private philanthropy with an industry investment. A colleague in the back of the room, I've got to give a shout out to our friends at JP Chase, Liza Cowan. Story just probably a year and a half ago, I guess, but a little over a year. Our friends at JP Chase made a $1 million investment in our community and technical colleges, matched by $5 million from the state of Louisiana, matched by another, only $1 million required, but ultimately we were able to put together about $7 million from industry because there's such a demand there. Because let me tell you, when industry writes a check, they know that they're going to get something of value from that. And so we know that there's an alignment with the industry demands from a data perspective. We know that the industry has a willingness to write a check for that program. Ultimately, what's being produced, as was pointed out a second ago, we start with the end in mind. So the who, the what, and now the how. The how is compression of programs. You see, the big challenge that community colleges have had over the years is that we have been built in the image of universities, primarily because most of the people who built them went to universities, and that's what they know. The reality is the job of community colleges is so very different than that of universities. We've got to leave that behind. We are an open admissions institution. So we're in the process now of asking our colleges, why do we have an admissions office? Think of it. Everyone gets in. Why do you have an office that is admissions when everyone gets in? Those are the kinds of questions that you have to be able to ask yourself when there's a fundamental difference between our institutions and universities. But the reason is because there's a fundamental difference in our mission. We're very different in the way that we deliver what we deliver. Compression of programs, we have Sasol is a major industry partner of ours, has made billions of dollars of investments in Southwest Louisiana. They came to us and they asked, we are the primary provider of process operators for the industry. We were producing about 100, 120 process operators a year. And their question of us was, can we double in the next 3 years? And after the chancellor from that college sort of peeled himself up off the floor, he said, let me go back and talk to my folks and I'll let you know. Here's what he realized. He looked through the applications of the students who had made application for this program in the past. A full 40% of the applications had come from people who had already finished college degrees. These are $65,000 a year job starting salaries. So they've already finished all of the general education courses. All they lack are the content courses. We were able to go back and take that process technology curriculum with the help of the Louisiana Chemical Association and many of our employers, condense it down to a 16-week program, 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. You miss no days of the class. At the end of that program, we had 20 students start. We had 20 students finish. That's not a graduation rate problem, folks. These are folks who know that there's an impact at the end for their families. They're willing to pause. We had a dentist, a chiropractor, 2 principals, a multitude of school teachers who jumped into these programs and are now out there earning a great living. All of them went to work in the same zip code as the college. I want you to think of that. Again, it relates back to the community. Other examples in the construction field, a whole range of areas where there's alignment with industry needs. There's also compression of the curriculum to ensure that this population is able to go to work. What are the results? The results have been for us a doubling in the number of students who have graduated from our institutions in 6 years. We are now up to just over 22,000 students who graduated this past year. The prior year, we had about 20,000 students graduate from our colleges. That 20,000 students earned $723 million in the Louisiana economy. Now, I want you to think of this for a second. In Louisiana, you pay about 7.5% of your income back to the state in tax collections. So on $723 million, at 7.5%, you're giving back to the state in about 20 months the full measure of what the state gave to us to operate. That's an ROI that's pretty solid. Within 2 years, we believe that we'll be at the $1.3 billion range. The graduation numbers are increasing. What's most impressive is in a 4-year period, we went from 40% of our graduates being in high-demand fields to over 70% of our graduates in high-demand fields. Again, the impact of narrowing the curriculum, but yet continuing to increase in the number of students who are graduating. All of this in a demand environment. I think the driver behind this is not only the financial impact of what would happen to our colleges if we didn't change, but it's also the fact that our environment is such, our economy is such, that there's a great level of demand for what it is that we're doing, similar to the demand that you heard Sandy talk about earlier. So again, the who, the what, and the how. From a philanthropy point of view, made one of the recommendations, consider co-investing with industry. The other things that I would encourage you to do is think beyond scholarships, as you heard earlier. Scholarships are not the great need that we have in institutions. Be willing to take a risk. Be willing to take a risk on not institutions, but the people that you're investing in. You're investing in institutions to ensure that people cross that stage and cross that threshold. Hold us accountable not just simply for the credentials, although I appreciate the Lumina goal. hold us accountable not just for the credentials, but what happens as a result of the credential, the earnings, the fiscal impact, the economic impact, the equity impact that happens for families. So appreciate the fact that we're having a conversation about community and technical colleges with each one of you. It is truly, you've heard the term democratic institutions, but I will tell you, they are the most transformational institutions and entities that you can find in any community, at the intersection of K-12 and post-secondary education, at the intersection of the not-for-profit community. All of those different organizations can be found on community and technical college campuses and partnerships. And so if you want to make a single investment in a single place that has high impact, community and technical colleges are about as good of an investment as you can make. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Powerful. I just want to pause for a moment and give recognition to each of you for your work. You can tell that this has been an investment of time, a labor of love, and certainly is important to our collective future. So I just want to thank you for that. And I thought I might pause for a second. You started down this road of saying what philanthropy can do, and I think it's important for us to hear how we can support these types of initiatives, because something we keep saying at Lumina is, okay, we have some of these opportunities. How do we scale this? How do we get every community college in this country looking externally, designing with the end in mind, being student ready? Those are principles and things that we know we need to replicate. What are some things that you see we can do in addition to, co-investing with industry, holding you accountable on the end? What are some other things that you see philanthropy can do to support this work?
I think the scaling up concept is extremely important, and the technical assistance. I can, share with you that 5 years of investments that some of Ohio's community colleges have had, Lorraine being one of those, from partners, from philanthropic donors that have really enabled us, I think, to look holistically within the institution and to make the changes from that policy perspective. State policy helping to drive some of the changes at the state level as well as at the federal level. I think the collective voice is extremely important in that conversation because there are so many barriers that we as individual institutions can't address, but collectively I think there's the impact to do that. The faculty investments are huge, and I think also looking at the more intrusive types of student, whether it's advising, whether it's the counseling, the tutoring, that again is not the scholarship model. Like Valencia, Lorraine has a very proactive foundation. We're one of the 10th largest community college foundations. We contribute, we award scholarships, but we've also done self-investment, and we receive a lot of that support coming from other foundations than to our foundation that does create things like innovative teaching awards, and so and funding partners within our high schools so that they are able to transform their teaching as well. In addition to investing, we've created an innovation fund that really provides almost a skunk works within our institution to develop and try new ideas. And so I think those are non-traditional ways that philanthropic support can really help to drive within our community colleges.
If I may add, you mentioned state policy. I think it's so very important that the philanthropy community uses the bully pulpit that you have to drive state policy. And I don't simply mean that in terms of things like admissions criteria. I mean it in particular as it relates to fiscal policy. You can't fight against the money. Just think of that for a second. You want to drive improvements? Put the right incentives in place, and I can assure you, you will see the results that you're looking for. And we've seen it play out time and again, be it in the K-12 environment. I live in a state that has transformed K-12 education. And the primary reason is because of a school accountability effort where superintendents and school districts and individual schools and principals understand that every year the scorecard is going to come out. Parents are going to look at it, industry is going to look at it, and they're going to be held accountable for that. So there are opportunities for you to make investments in ways that drive policy. One of the areas that we're looking at today is a third leg of the funding stool for us. Louisiana has tuition and state funds. We do not have local funds. And that makes it very difficult to find stability at times. And so the third leg of the funding stool for us in a state where you will not find local millage as an option is to have industry direct assessment, to have industry pay directly to institutions as the third leg of that funding stool. And so I just encourage you to look for those kinds of ways to impact financial policy.
All of this is, your influence as conveners is a change in mindset and looking at return on investment and recognizing that what we have is just squandered human potential based on things that really aren't valid sorting mechanisms. In that this upcoming with Monty and John, you'll hear how students who the education system considers not educable are now working in high-tech jobs and going on getting bachelor's degrees because we start with the end in mind and made the college accommodating to the student and created the pathways for those students. It's a different mindset, but the mindset for policymakers and the public is how can we get, what's the return on investment? Not is college affordable, but how can we get affordable, high quality credentials at different levels that return to students individually, their families, and to the taxpayers.
And I want to open it up to the floor. We would love to have questions from you all.
My name is Andrea Massey-Farrell. I'm from the Harvey and Carol Massey Foundation here in Orlando. Marcia, I just had a quick comment regarding one of your slides. As someone that is very familiar with the community college route before a four-year, going to a four-year institution, I think one of the slides would be more helpful for somebody like me to see the comparison without room and board. And looking at it from per credit hour, because I think that's a much more powerful statement to really show the difference. So just wanted to share that feedback. Had a question quickly for Monty. After taking the tour last year for the K through 12 in New Orleans and seeing the state of education within your state, do you find that with the charter schools coming in and being so successful that you're seeing a rate of more degreed or more diplomaed individuals coming into your system? Or do you feel you still have to kind of help give a hand up to some of those that can't get a decent education?
Great question. We have not seen a substantial change in our demographics. And let me be real clear. The work has been extraordinary by particularly our charter school operators. But the reality is most of the charter schools aim students at four-year institutions. It's a reality. And that's not in any way a negative statement. It's a reality of the business model of many of the charter schools. We have worked with a number of those that are more technical in nature and are aiming students more toward some of the credentials that we're talking about. We've been able to develop entire associate degree programs on the college campus, as has been referred to here, through dual enrollment and some other opportunities. But we are not seeing that kind of demographic. In fact, what we're seeing over a period of time when we put selective admissions in place for entering high school or students who recently graduated from high school, we're seeing our average age increase over time. It goes back to the demographics, and it goes back to the programs that you're offering. If you offer the right programs, that 27-year-old population will show up at your institution. It's just a matter of time until they're there.
You mentioned a moment ago that part of, I don't know if it was a leg of the stool or anyway, a portion of your funding was coming from industry fees. And I'm wondering, and I'm not sure who this would be the best to ask of, but how does that mix in currently with as a percentage of your funding? And where do you think ideally it should be? Maybe there's best cases that you know about from other places. And then also, in what form do they come? Are they paying, some of them paying in advance for their employees to go up in skills, or is it paid for afterwards? How is it actually paid? So
yeah, I'll give you the Louisiana numbers. In a period of 8 years, we went from 75% state funds, 25% tuition, to now 75% tuition funds, 25% state, to give you an idea. And that is what is driving the value proposition. The question that we ask ourselves every single day is, our students yesterday bought a loaf of bread for $1, Today, we're asking them to pay $1.25. What are they getting today that they didn't get yesterday? It's very simple. So the industry assessment piece is more aimed at industry creating a funding source that is not a large number. I'm not looking for a 50% increase in our dollar value, but I'm looking for a more stable version. The state's dollar is continually declining. The tuition dollar is increasing, and at some point we're pricing ourselves out of the market, there's no doubt. So how do we create a fund that's in the $40 to $50 million range that industry is willing to support?
This is proposed, just to be clear. He's
Right.
proposing this as part of the UI ESA tax, that employment tax that employers attaching an increment to that, which I think makes a lot of sense. The economic case can be made very clearly. Politically, I don't know. But please. That's right.
Habit of the state is to cut those rates.
That's right.
And so several states have been successful in approaching industry leadership and the state government to say, why don't you go ahead and reduce that rate, but reduce it less than you actuarially have to, and take the surplus dollars, put them in some kind of a human development fund that can flow to colleges or something, or schools or somebody else. And they usually put a time limit on it. We're gonna take that extra revenue for 5 years to create a fund. It becomes almost like a small public foundation.
It makes a lot of, the return to industry generally is the, reduction in recruiting costs, availability of work, which is hugely expensive. You can make the economic case, but again, it has to be made politically.
Similarly, if you're in one of the states like Florida, their state leadership is trying to reduce taxes on business and industry. The value proposition you can make is a way of reducing that tax is to provide a tax credit for those who invest in businesses. The European model. So rather than eliminating the inventory tax, why don't you provide a tax credit for every dollar that company spends on human development?
We have some, just playing off that, some studies that just came out about return on investment, where they were major companies, big companies that you would readily recognize, that trying to help them figure out how do we take advantage of tax credits that may be offered, but then certainly showing the return on investment around not having to spend so much on recruitment, being able to keep employees longer. So if there's some of that evidence that would be helpful, you can find that as well. So there's lots of good support for what you're doing here.
Question for you from Ohio. In Colorado, we were very fortunate last year to pass some legislation that allows for industry-specific credentialing to be paid for with dual enrollment dollars or concurrent enrollment dollars. Do you have a similar policy environment in Ohio or in Louisiana?
So the policy that changed in Ohio is that high schools are now required to provide to students pathways of 15 and 30 credit hours if the student chooses to do that. So, and the state funds the student one time, but the funds follow the student. And there's a financial model then, and the colleges are required to work out an MOU with each of the school districts. So we've actually created a model that provides then some of that funding back to the high school so that it creates the incentive for them as well. One of the big incentive pieces, though, in addition, so that they're not losing money on it, but one of the really big game changers in all of this is we do a financial model for each of the school districts that they can then send out to the parents in those school districts that demonstrates what the dollar savings were for them on all their tuition dollars. And then at graduation, in addition to talking about the scholarships that students have gotten to go away to XYZ universities, they're able to say, and they graduated with, 30 credit hours at a value of, and that is very, very powerful for those communities. And that's turned around, I think, a major piece for superintendents and school boards, because now they look like they're the champions of it, and now they are, and that it's a win-win for everybody.
Just to be clear, I'm hugely supportive, as you heard, of dual enrollment, especially programmatic dual enrollment. But as Sandy said, I think, they're going to need to, and based on our research and labor market outcomes, they're going to need to go to college, at least for a certificate. Just because they have an associate degree right out of, based on how the labor market works. But that's fine, they're set up to do that. And where you have cases here where it's all the way to the bachelor's, I'm not saying they're going to get the bachelor's immediately. That's great, labor market ladders. But just so there's not expectations on the part of people that, some will, but most students coming right out of high school, even if they have an associate degree, ideally in a career area. But what it's really done is it's helped them explore a career. They'll end up somewhere else, but it's gotten them on a path to start networking with people in colleges, in industry. That's what's going to get them ahead.
You know, one important piece that I failed to mention is we require work-based learning within all of our programs. And so that gives that student that leg up to see, do they really want to be in that career? And it gives the employer a firsthand view of, would that individual be a good fit within our organization?
So the Louisiana answer to that question is yes, and there are three components to it. We have something that we refer to as Jumpstart. These regional economies, each of the school districts in each of those regions, along with industry representatives, community college representatives, come together and identify 3 key clusters that we'll work through and develop, very similar to what you've seen in the pathways. And the second component to that is $40 million in what's referred to as a supplemental course allocation that pays tuition on behalf of the students. $40 million will go a long way in dual enrollment tuition. And then the third component is superintendents and schools receive accountability points as a part of students taking dual enrollment courses, earning credentials. You see that escalation as students complete more and more credits and more credentials.
You know, one thing I would point out on dual enrollment, and this is part of the narrative with community colleges, and part of, I think, the challenge that we have in sometimes telling our story, and that is that when you look at some of the national statistics around success rates within community colleges and graduation rates and that kind of thing, the federal definition looks at first-time, full-time degree seeking in college. That represents, in the case of Lorain County Community College, 7% of the population that we serve. So we've got, 93% of the other students who don't fit that definition. Dual enrollment students who are among our highest completers and most successful aren't counted in any of that. And they complete everything.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big issue. Of the students, of the 1.7 or over 2 million students who enter higher ed through community colleges in 2007, 17% were dual enrollment. I think it's probably even larger. So about 1/5 of students nationally. And we as a public are not, middle-class families and working-class families are understanding this, but we're not investing in it strategically. They are successful, but we're not channeling that motivation and success to the industries and the degrees that we need. These guys that are offering away with industry, community colleges, school partnership, figuring out the finances that we can do that. We need to take advantage of this strategically. It's going to be a political issue because, universities are starting to question, and I honestly, even though usually I think universities are snobs, I'm a university person, there is a question of the value of the quality of instruction. We find that it's best delivered on the college campus, or if it's not, it needs to be connected programmatically, not just sending out any old master's credit teacher, not knocking the teacher, but if it's not connected programmatically, we're not making the best use of the taxpayers' money and, putting that student on a path, which is, more important even.
I guess for Marsha, I picked up right away when you said that freshmen had 6 college credits and sophomores 7, because in North Carolina they could only go down to age 16, or for juniors and seniors. And is that a state policy?
It is a state policy, and that's something that just changed.
'Cause that's big, I think.
It's big. So that's new state policy. In fact, it goes down to 7th grade, and
Wow.
and I do have issues with that. I mean, every once in a while you might find a talented student in 7th grade, but are they really prepared? But that was state policy that changed, and so this is some of the new design as a result of that. You know, Ohio has a very interesting landscape in terms of higher education. Our governor, Governor Kasich, has been a maverick when it's come to higher ed and really pushing the higher ed agenda. And so he has tasked the higher ed sectors in the state to create the systems and incentives based on then the legislative mandates. So the College Credit Plus and all those changes down to 9th grade really just happened within the past several years. And the other thing that we've done that I didn't address, but it ties into this entire conversation, we went from 10% performance-based funded to 50% to 100%
For your state funding.
for all of our state funding within 3 years. And so if that doesn't give accountability, but what he did is he said to the community college sector, you designed the system. And so I had the opportunity to be part of the team that designed the formula and the system for that, and we were able to do it based on evidence-based practices to create the incentives within the framework. Is it the best that it can be? We're going to continue to tweak it, but it's evidence-based, and it really has the momentum framework built into it. And this is an example, I think, of the philanthropic community being at the table, because the philanthropic community provided, in this case Lumina, the technical support that brought in CCRC, that brought in Jobs for the Future and others to really help guide and shape that. And there are other states that have, you know, different models, but all reflect the unique community college mission, so that it wasn't based upon the university structure, for example, that wasn't creating the right incentives for our students. And I think that's another role.
What I like
that you
about
can play.
Ohio, I'm not a Kasich supporter politically, but they're taking the return on investment approach. They're saying we have limited resources for higher education. We're not, you know, raising taxes. How can we best utilize our existing resources to improve that? What we've seen in other states is indiscriminate cutting, which is crazy, because even in its current performance level, it's a high returning investment. If you have a strong investment, if you invest in a company, you want to nurture that company. I think Ohio has taken, but in the legislature too, they're trying new things to get a better return on investment, and they're listening to people on the ground like Lorraine. That idea, the dual enrollment, came from you guys. The work they've done locally, proved with the local communities, and then taken statewide. So in terms of the messages that you can use, you know, politically, that, you know, this is an orientation that is good for communities. It's good for the state, and, you know, it's feasible even in a, you know, blue-red state like Ohio.
I'm Bill Kaler with the Richardson Foundation in Fort Worth, Texas. Is the success of dual credit in early college high schools trying to tell us something about the content and delivery system of K through 12?
That's correct.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. We had graduation 2 weeks ago. We have had an early college high school for 10 years. We graduated 70 students. Each of those students had an associate's degree as well as their high school diploma. We totally have transformed the curriculum. We're now, those are the lessons we've taken down to dual enrollment. It is a systems change. It's a culture change. It's a systems change. It's a policy change. It works in every early college I've looked at. They have statistics that demonstrate the strength of it if they've redesigned it. And
If
it is
they've redesigned it.
yeah. And it is designing it with that end in mind.
I don't think the schools are going to change unless we build the pathway, the pipeline down from careers through higher education down into the schools. They can't do it themselves. Like I just said, and Sandy said, companies aren't hiring for these career path jobs right out of school. And the schools are sorting out students, the same students who are in the IBEST programs that you hear about and work at. They were in high school. They either failed out or they got C's. They were mediocre students. These are the same people with the same minds. They were probably smarter when they were younger, who failed out in our schools because we're sorting them based on some mythical university kind of curriculum that is not relevant to the economy, to our employers, and it's not relevant to what we consider, real college post-secondary training.
Yeah, great statement
good-
in your question.
good observation.
That was, one of the things that many of my K-12 colleagues, I hear them say, our state superintendent is a great example, is that K-12 education has lost its sense of purpose. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We've told the public, and many people in the public believe that K-12 is to prepare their son or daughter to go off to the university. When the reality is that wasn't the purpose of K-12 education ever. Go back to the early 1900s and think about what it was that we called the purpose of K-12 education. In large part, I think it's an interesting lead-in to the discussion at a national level about America's college promise and the need to have the next level of conversation, not about how we make community colleges free. That's not the discussion from my perspective. The real discussion is what is required from an education perspective today in order to be a productive citizen in this economy.
That's right.
And to that point, I think that's why we can't silo the different sectors. You can't think of K-12 and then community colleges and then universities. It's the entire ecosystem and how it all fits together. And that, I think, is a policy piece, as well as, national conversations that really need to be occurring.
I also think this gets to the middle skilled jobs. Joe, you're a very warm person, and I like you, but when you say middle skills job, I cringe, because there's this sort of view that all we've got to do is give these short-term certificates. Sandy was talking about the power of short-term certificates, and our research and others shows this, but it's got to be a broader path to degrees and continued learning, most of which turns in the workplace. So I think we want to talk about getting low-skill workers and people entering the workforce into knowledge jobs, which have varying levels and varying levels of credentials attached to them. Okay.
Hi, Kevin Greer from New Profit. We're a venture philanthropy firm based out of Boston. We're doing some work related to a set of skills that we call power skills, and people talk about them more commonly as soft skills or employability skills. And I'm curious to hear, and particularly in Ohio and Louisiana, how you all think about the integration and development of that set of skills into what it sounds like very career-focused, kind of almost technical career paths. How do you integrate those?
So that's a great question, and I actually had to bring Davis onto campus to fight some of the knives going in me.
Yeah, so they come in me.
So they come to him.
It's okay.
But we look at them as infused learning outcomes, and so we have them designed into every program. And it starts with the very first student development course. And that's been one of the comments that we've heard time and time again from employers. And we've had to rethink soft skills too. It's gone beyond what the traditional ones have been, whether it's been communications but now and we call it the gig economy in terms of, especially the newer workforce and the emergent workforce, and how they're just going from one gig to the next, and hours are different for them and how they work. And so we're rethinking right now, and I'd be very interested in the power skills, but ours are infused outcomes, everything from critical thinking to literacy, to financial literacy, to public speaking, and all of those, but they're embedded into every program. But I think we need to reframe it around the whole gig economy.
And the good news on that is Michael Munch from Joyce Foundation is going to be leading a discussion, our fourth panel, exactly on this topic. And as you know, they have a study on this.
Sure. The soft skills, thank you for not naming them soft skills, because the reality is the notion soft skills sort of suggests they're not quite important. But when we talk to employers, what they tell us is, we'll take care of the hard skills. Give me someone who shows up to work, can pass a drug test, can work with others, can communicate. Soft skills and the whole idea of the integration, we do much of what Marcia just mentioned, but let me give you an example of what some people don't quite think of as soft skills. If you're going to work on an oil platform in the middle of the Gulf, you'd probably better be able to deal with 2 weeks away from family. Probably had better be able to handle a helicopter ride. You probably better be okay with a little bit of isolation, because you stand out on that deck and you look and you can't see anything but water for as far as you can see. Those are not the typical kinds of soft skills that people think of, but what it really features is the work environment. And so as we were putting together the compressed P-TECH curriculum I mentioned to you a second ago, we brought in the largest employers and said, build a classroom. So what did they do? They added for us a digital sign-in so that they clocked in and clocked out. We knew exactly when they arrived and when they left, and that's a problem if you show up late or don't stay through the entire day. We had to drug test those students on the front end before they could go into the program. Some people are uncomfortable with that. I've got to ask a question, why? If you can't go to work for the local employers when you finish the program from a soft skills point of view, why would we have you in the program? Because it takes up a slot. So there are a whole range of those kinds of things that we let employers design the classrooms from that perspective.
I'm seeing, I think it's time. I know we could talk much longer and at length, and luckily we have several panels throughout the rest of the day. But again, thank you to our experts and wonderful people out doing amazing things, and thank you all for your questions.